So there are two churches along the south end of Broadway, which I've covered, which I want to talk to you about now. The first one is a lot further south than this, and as I understand it, that's the main sort of church for the Episcopal Church around here, and yet this one behind me is classed as a chapel. So the church down there is quite iconic. It's very sort of pointy. I think that's Gothic style. And inside is exactly as you might think. There are stained glass windows. There's a lovely altar. It's all very it's open plan, but it's all very what you would expect from an Episcopal style church. This one behind me is not. It's collegiate inside, and yet the altar is at one end, and it's quite whitewashed inside. There aren't stained glass windows. It's very plain, and yet some of the decor around near the altar area is highly Jewish. It's Hebrew. All of it's in Hebrew. It's bizarre because even I do not understand or know one of the major sort of bits that they're using down there liturgically. I will have to look that up to see what it is, but it's sort of like a screen, a movable screen that opens, and I'm sure it's to do with a sort of Jewish screen that they use in a sort of Orthodox Jewish place of worship, but I don't know for certain. I've never ever seen it used in a church before, never ever, so I don't know what that is, and I shall have to have a look at it. On the other side, that is the area where you're heading towards the World Trade Center, or what was the World Trade Center. So this building here would have been right in the shadow of that when that thing came down. And yet, of course, it's not harmed. It is, I believe, the oldest church in Manhattan. It's St. Paul's Chapel. I also discovered why Wall Street is called Wall Street, because believe it or not, there was a wall there. It was the North Wall for when the city of New York only came up to Wall Street. It was a Dutch settlement at that point, and they built a wall across the island at the bottom, and Wall Street is where they built the wall, like Hadrian's Wall, except much smaller. So after I did my walk and talk with you last, I discovered something else. Apparently this church is touched, really. I've probably spoken to you before about how St. Paul's Cathedral during the Blitz was touched. That is to say that when it was targeted for destruction by the German bombers, and it was right in the way, it was missed. Somehow it was not destroyed, and it's one of those things where you say it should really have been, considering where it was and how big a target it was. Well, apparently this church has a very similar history. When it was built, there was a fire, apparently. I suppose every great city has a fire, and there was a great fire of Manhattan as well. And it was one of the places that should have been burnt to a cinder, but somehow managed not to be burnt to a cinder. In the same way as the World Trade Center, it says, was across the road, and I believe, that's it, pretty much, this sort of space here. So, if you can imagine, it would have been right up there, coming all the way down here, and somehow it managed to squash. Apparently this whole place was filled with debris and broken buildings and the like. And then there's this little church standing here like it has done for a couple of 100 years, somehow managing not to be damaged. So there we are. I thought I'd just add that. Now I've actually read it. It's not just me hypothesising, it's actually the truth.